Back tonight with another Division II conference, this time moving from the GLIAC down south to the Gulf South. And this one is an interesting one. This is one that has bred national champions out of this conference. The four teams we're talking about tonight are all going to be in contention for it all coming in 2025. Some really high caliber squads. But what you notice, Drew, when we talk about this conference, four teams, how the hell does that work? And I think the landscape of this is kind of what we have to address. First of all, the Gulf South right now is down and out. Only 4 football member schools going forward because of the resurrection, so to speak, of Conference Carolinas and other schools inside of the conference being poached to other conferences. So the long-term, I guess, stability of the GSC is very much up in the air. What do we know about the 4 teams that still are in the conference, though?
I think what we know about the 4 teams is it's going to be a dogfight between the 4. Like you said, it's a very good conference, and I think the toughest part is honestly, like, I'm sure these coaches and athletic directors have had an absolute pain to find guys to schedule with because,
Yes.
like, if you think about it, looking at what we know about conference schedules, most of the time you're scheduling teams later in the year, right? And in that mid-level to where it's just like, okay, the first week of October, you got a conference schedule game. For these guys, it's like, hey, if we start in the beginning, then this middle chunk, we got to find people, and that's, I'm sure, really tough.
Yeah, week 0, I think, hopefully opens up a lot of possibilities for them. There are teams opting to take buys kind of in the middle of the season so they could find some out-of-conference scheduling there. But the first team that we have to talk about when it comes to the Gulf South, the Valdosta State Blazers, 13-1. A year ago, they make the trip to the national championship where they lose to Ferris State on the biggest stage. But the biggest storyline for this Blazer team is losing former head coach Tremaine Jackson, who we had on the show. He goes, takes the job at FCS Prairie View A&M. He's replaced by their former offensive coordinator, Coach Graham Craig, who we also just had on the show. So a lot of Blazer lineage coming through here. He helped lead this VSU team to the national championship and was really the backbone of one of the most potent offenses in Division II football. And from Athlink, our source for all this transfer portal data, we know that with instability at the head coaching position or a move comes a lot of people leaving. Sometimes it's a mass exodus. Valdosta State, for as good as they are, for as high of a pedigree as they are, they were no exception. 50 reported players in the portal at one point or another for this Valdosta State Blazer team. For many, that could decimate the team. We talked about it with the team like Ferris. A mass exodus like that could result in the team taking a dip. I don't think that will be the case for this team. We can talk about a little bit why. A lot of those players follow Coach Jackson to Prairie View, others finding D1 opportunities elsewhere. Rodney Bullard's guy comes to mind right away, wide receiver, going to play for the Spartans at Michigan State this fall. There's so many other ones just kind of top of mind there. Multiple All-Americans, all-conference selections leaving the Blazer sidelines. But on the other side of that, inside the transfer portal, they're bringing in 21 recorded transfers, 14 of them from the Division I ranks, many of which come with playing experience at those previous institutions. And one of the most exciting things for the Blazers coming out of this transfer portal class, Drew, is actually not one of the Division I transfers. I want to tell you about a guy who's making the quote-unquote lateral move from a one Division II institution to another, that being the linebacker Scooter Baker coming in from Oklahoma Baptist. This is a guy that should be kind of a day one shoe-in impact maker for this Valdosta State team. Scooter, in the 2024 season, his season was cut short due to injury after 3 games. But within that 3 games, one of them was against the number 1 team in the country, Harding. He had 15 tackles in the TFL against the Bison, who we know how hard it is to line up against those guys. 6 foot, 220 pounds, the 2023 All-American honorable mention, all-region linebacker. He was a first-team All-GAC selection, and that is going to be a day one impact difference maker for this Valdosta State team that is losing depth at the linebacker position, so Scooter's a guy you need to have your eye on going into this season. Another guy, though, you talk about supplementing that linebacker core on the defensive side of the ball. This guy coming in from a Division I background is a guy that I think Coach Graham and or Coach Craig and company, are very excited about. Talking about the guy from Delaware State, that being Aaron Willis, previously with Houston, with Tennessee. This is a journeyman type pickup for the Blazers and a guy that is, again, you would imagine going to be a day one impact type of guy. Now, another good note with this squad, quite a few transfers coming from former D2 Limestone. Unfortunately, they had to shut down their program after this season, so it's good to see them kind of get a step back into things. So, moving forward, 2025 season questions for the Blazers and Coach Craig. Can they continue the dominance at home? They've won 14 of the last 16, including the last 8 consecutive games at their home field down there in Titletown, Georgia. Sammy Edwards is gone, though. The 2-time Harlan Hill finalist was a big reason for their success. The only other quarterback to see snaps in game for this team was Seth Smith. He'll be a junior this fall, 6'2", just under 200 pounds. Definitely will be a guy as a part of the competition, but where it gets interesting is the quarterback they're bringing in. Harris Boyd joins the Blazers from Memphis. And Drew, that's important because, yeah, of course, any quarterback from Memphis you would imagine is going to be a guy that knows how to sling the rock. But what's interesting about this pickup is that's actually where Coach Craig spent the 2023 season as a senior offensive analyst and quarterbacks coach. So Boyd comes to Valdosta State with 3 years of eligibility left. He didn't see any time in game with the Tigers, but once again, you'll imagine that he's definitely going to be a part of that QB competition with the Blazers. Again, 2025 schedule, they got the Week 0 Labor Day Classic we've talked about with Clark Atlanta at Legion Field. That's their first neutral site game in 7 years, which will be interesting. And you go through some really tough non-conference matchups. Talked about the scheduling a little bit earlier on. They have found a way to put together a quality schedule for 2025. Johnson C. Smith, a team from the CIAA who was 8-2 just a year ago. You bring in a national powerhouse like Lenore Ryan, 10-3 last year with a playoff win. And finally, you're at the Citadel, a D1 in South Carolina, That's their first D1 opponent that they've played against since 2003. All of that to say, a very, very daunting schedule for a Valdosta State team that is going to have to reload and try and figure out their offensive identity, especially in the first couple games of the season, Drew.
Yeah, I think obviously when you hear the amount of portal guys and guys you've lost in general, because then you got to add in graduation and everything to that extent as well, it's very alarming, right? But then when you look at just the guys that you anticipate the Blazers bringing in, you're like, okay, this is one of those situations that we had talked about with Ferris State and we talked about with like a Davenport, teams that are successful, right? They're not just looking to rebuild after a great season. They're looking to reload, right? And we had talked about what is the portal, one of the blessings of the portal is getting guys that not only are you, like for instance, the quarterback familiar with, but you're also getting guys that are able to contribute right away versus guys who might not understand the defensive and offensive packages that they might have to get into compared to a high school. So I think that's where the Blazers are going to look to reload. And I think one of those things is they look at those first couple of games, right? Starting off with an opponent who was 8-2 last year. How do we get this momentum going, right? That's a huge confidence win right there if you get that. And you talked about playing the Citadel. If you walk into the Citadel and win that game, talk about, hey, that's exactly how to get the guys motivated, exactly how to set the culture and set the tone from day one.
Yeah, tone setter for sure. Let's talk about one of the first roadblocks when it comes to Gulf South play in the Statesmen.
All right, yeah, so starting off with Delta State, the Statesmen, solid 2024 campaign, 6-4, but obviously, Delta State has really high expectations with itself, especially after just success within the program. And they got a 2025 team that's looking for something to prove. But I will say, we talked about scheduling with Valdosta. Yeah, Delta State has something as well to do with that scheduling because they have 3 opponents that all finished over 500 to start the year. Central Missouri, as we know, the Mules. That's a tough program right there. North Greenville, as well as UNC Pembroke. So they'll be tested very early. And then, obviously, let's go to the departures. We're looking at a couple of guys that – entered the portal, whether it be wide receiver Jalen May, JJ Hudson, a linebacker. And then this is where I want to focus to Amarian Foster and Tamaj Hoffman, 2 guys that also entered the portal. And then as far as graduation, Kelvin Smith, a running back, to go with Tamaj Hoffman, who's also a running back, and Amir Taylor, their leading tackler. So you look at a couple of guys, Cope, that they're losing guys that not only could have came back, but they're also losing some seniors too that highly contributed. And that's going to go into a couple of questions, but they are bringing in some key guys too. So Jamison Kelly, a defensive back from Indiana. And when you hear Indiana at the Division II level, you're thinking, oh, wow, Power 4. That's a big time get. So expect Jamison Kelly to come in and contribute right away, as well as Matt Rozier from Chattanooga, also a Division I team. So they're getting guys that they expect to come in and contribute immediately.
Yeah.
The questions I have for Delta State, we always talk about, at least me, when you're looking to build a program, especially on the offensive side of the ball, they always talk about how it's tough to necessarily like create an offense center around a quarterback, right? So what do you establish to get the quarterback going? You run game. And with both leading backs gone, Delta State's identity, like who steps up in the running back room? It's a huge position in sports, sometimes forgotten about, but very recently, as we see in the NFL with guys like Barkley, Derrick Henry, McCaffrey, Gibbs, like running back is a huge part of the offense. It could be a completely different difference maker. And so I think that's a huge thing, like who steps up in that. And then can you survive an early schedule? I think that when you and I both know, as far as being on teams that have won, teams that have lost, when you start hot, it's great. You keep the momentum going. When you start cold, it's tough to get the wheels churning. You know what I mean? And not only do they start with 3 opponents that we talked about, like Central Missouri, but they end with a brutal schedule back to back to back. West Florida, West Alabama, Valdosta State.
Yep.
And it's tough to start and finish with really, really tough scheduling.
And you talk about that running back room. I mean, that's a good point. Kelvin Smith, the first team all-conference selection last year for the Statesmen, that could go into determining and changing some of the profile and identity of that offense. From an offensive play caller standpoint, a coordinator standpoint, the way that you dictate and call the game is dependent upon the chess pieces that you have on the board, so to speak, the guys that you have available. And so when you take some of those guys out of the equation, you take those pieces out of the equation, we could see a Delta State team going into this fall that is trying to figure out its identity. Now, the next piece, of course, you're talking about are some mainstays and some pieces that are coming back. Who are the guys that'll determine that identity come August and September?
I think when you lose a guy that's a running back, it's great to have a returning quarterback. Cole Kirk, returning quarterback for for Delta State, very efficient last season. And obviously, when you get a winning record and you now have another year under the system, it's like, okay, how can we build off that? Ty Hosley, defensive back, very good defensive player, led the team in tackles. Expect him to have not only a more significant role, but a better season as well to build off exactly what he did last year. And then Jarius McFarland, another defensive back, led the team in interceptions. And he's another guy to where you expect him to not only contribute the way he did a year ago, but another year, more pressure to be an older guy leading the team. So expect Delta State to have a couple of guys. And then you're looking at Nino LeMay, who with a couple of receivers leaving, he could have a huge year stepping up into that role. And then William Carter. I went over the other linebacker that had just left for Delta State, Amir Taylor. So expect William Carter to now be that signal caller or the guy defensively. We all know when you look at defensive teams, you're looking at, okay, who's that linebacker that's, a leader out there. So expect him to come in and, really contribute.
And I know we're talking about just this last year's team, but I think what we saw too, you talk about identity from an offensive standpoint, no more Patrick Shegog leading this Delta State offense. That was a guy who finished up his career in 2023 and was, one of the best players in the state. Right? Regardless of level, he was one of the best players in the state and voted as such by numerous press associations. And when you lost a guy like that was a mainstay of the program, was really the face of that program for a long time, him and the Fighting Okra, of course, shout out to one of the best mascots in college football. You lose a guy like that, a lot of times there is going to be a regression. But the best programs, after a year like that, it happens, they will come back the following. And I think that's what we're going to see from this Delta State squad. But moving forward, a team that I've had the pleasure of covering, I think ad nauseum over the last couple of years, the West Florida Argonauts. This is a team that was 7-3, 2024, and one that has been, ever since its inception, synonymous with the national championship and the national playoff. A team that took less than a decade to claim their first national championship in 2019. A team that has a former quarterback leading the charge now, and Coach Caleb Nobles, that I was grateful enough to have on the show pretty recently. And to start things off by the Argos, again, transfer portal, the loss is there. When you have guys you cultivate to a high level, what happens is they go to the next level. 17 players leaving in this cycle, 2 of them all conference, 5 more starters, 5 DBs leaving in that class, Drew. A big portion of that defensive secondary was decimated for this Argonauts team, but we'll talk about how they address that with their incoming class. For me, the biggest loss for this team, if it's one guy, it's the 6'5", 256-pound defensive lineman, Travion Mitchell. That's a tough loss. He makes the move up to FBS South Florida, stays in state. He was the co-defensive player of the year in the Gulf South last year. 17.5 tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks in 2024 with 46 total tackles. Replacing that kind of production from a defensive lineman standpoint, very difficult. Now, On the incoming class, transfer portal wise, 27 incoming, 5 of them D1 bounce backs. You got 8 DBs, Drew, in this transfer portal class. What do you think as a dude coming in from a DB perspective of like, obviously it's not a quarterback. There's more than one of them in the field at the time. I wasn't born yesterday, but 8 defensive backs coming in one class, the competition level in that camp has to be ridiculous, right?
That's exactly what I was going to get to. You said there's only one quarterback that plays. Well, there's only 4 DBs that usually play, potentially sometimes 5. So if you bring in 8 transfers, iron sharpens iron. And I think that's exactly what West Florida's looking at right there. When it's like, hey, we're going to come in with some guys that, want to play, and may the best man win.
100%. And talking about those DBs a little bit in that incoming class, Roderick Webb from Virginia Union could be a day one starter for this Argonaut team. He's bounced around from team to team. He originally started at Charleston before transferring over to Virginia Union. And what you notice about both of those teams, those are some of the cream of the crop at the Division II level. Charleston, a team that, of course, with a fantastic running back and offense last year behind Siobhan Wright, made an incredible run. Virginia Union went on to have their best year in program history last year under Coach Parker into the playoffs. Those are teams that have experienced success at the D2 level. He comes to West Florida with a good amount of experience under his belt and some great snaps when it comes to game film. Another guy that I want to highlight for this West Florida team when it comes to the defensive secondary, Lumpy DeWeese, coming in from D1 Stetson. Now that's in the Pioneer League, so D1, but of course has that kind of non-scholarship clause, which is, don't even get me started on that. He played in 9 games though last year, had 40 solo tackles, and again, should be a big piece of this new revamped, reinvigorated defensive backfield for the West Florida Argonauts. And you continue going down the list here, 6 offensive linemen coming in. That certainly was an area they felt that they needed to address. Another guy that I want to mention down in the trenches, this time though across the line of scrimmage, the defensive line spot, a big-time addition for the Argos, Jamal Ellis. This is a guy that, to me, has struggled maybe a little bit to catch on with a team. He started at Samford, actually, out of high school, went the JUCO route before committing to West Alabama, an in-conference foe. Now, though, finishing his college career with the Argos. So these guys have gone out, they've done their homework, they've gotten people from a variety of backgrounds, from a variety of schools and levels, and it doesn't stop there. Another guy on that defensive side of the ball that'll be coming in to make a difference this fall is going to be linebacker Caleb Ross. Now, Ross comes to the Argos from FCS Brown University. He played in 10 games in 2023, but this is where it gets interesting. In 2024, he was sidelined. Now, I don't know if that's because of injury, if that's because of a change at the position or in coaches. This, though, what I do know is this will be a bounce-back year for Ross, who I would expect to have a big-time impact and role with this West Florida team. 2025 schedule. They open with Lenore-Rhine. We talked about Lenore-Rhine a little bit. The Bears are just a top-of-the-line program. Otherwise, non-conference schedule doesn't really jump off the page, if I'm being very honest with you. There are some decent opponents. You go West Virginia State, a team that was 6-5 a year ago. Northeastern State making a comeback in the MIAA. Nobody that really screams national contender. So you'd have to imagine West Florida will fare very well in their out-of-conference and should be certainly in the playoff conversation come conference play. But to close things out on West Florida, some questions for them. Lots of guys that are on their 3rd, 4th, or 5th school that I talked about. Right? The challenge for Coach Nobles and company with a group of wayward journeyman college football players, however you'd like to phrase it, how do you create and, more importantly, maintain a culture where these guys have come from all different places? You need a culture that will not break with this massive influx of new personnel, new opinions, new backgrounds. You need something that's strong enough where they come in and they conform to the existing culture. And I believe he has a way of doing that. Having coached under Dabo Sweeney at Clemson, having experiences formerly at West Florida. The question is, does he have the guys? Does he have the locker room to buy in and do that? I hope so. I think we're going to find out very soon. They got a new offensive coordinator, Donnie Baker, heading into this season. Not sure between him and Coach Nobles who will handle the play calling responsibilities. I'll have to see on that. But lots of new faces coming on the defense. They have a strong reputation down there at West Florida. The 2024 team not only led all of Division II, but ranked first across all levels of college football in tackles for loss per game and yards per play allowed. 11 tackles for loss per game, 3.6 yards per play. 2 statistics that are just ridiculous. and defensive coordinator Cavell Connor is back for year 3. So to actually close it out here, Drew, the kind of a cool piece on them. We talked about it. Definitely go back and check out the episode where Coach Nobles came on the show. A massive new stadium coming to campus down in Pensacola, Florida for the Argonauts, and they actually just secured an additional $2 million grant. Head Coach Nobles, like I said on the show recently, definitely check out that episode where we discuss that stadium further. But before I pass out and run out of breath, Drew, please tell me about this West Alabama squad.
Yeah, before I get into West Alabama, though, Lumpy, that's potentially all-name team.
Lumpy DeWeese. We
love
have to
it.
get back to the all-name team. We did a graphic like a year ago or two. I think it was 2 years ago. Lumpy might be first team all-name in D2.
Lumpy DeWeese, you are on the watch list for all-name team. All for it. No, absolutely. You pretty much hit it on the head for one thing before we get going into West Alabama. You talked a lot about the culture, and I think a lot of it, when you have sustained success like West Florida does, it is almost like get in where you fit in. You know what I mean? Like, we're going to bring you in, but this is a culture that we as a staff, we as a university, we have established. You know what I mean? And so I think that it's one of those things where those guys know exactly what they're going to be getting into. And I'm sure during spring ball it was addressed like, this is our culture. And I think at the end of the day, teams that want to win and have the buy-in within that culture, they usually and typically win. So, so as far as getting into West Alabama, breakout season last year, 9-2, Tigers took a major step forward after back-to-back seasons of middle of the road, 5-5 and 5-6 in the 2 years prior. So the next question is, can they sustain it? 2025 is obviously going to be a new year, new team, but at the same time, you're going to be having guys that are going to be having bigger roles, guys who are going to try to build off their previous success. So I think that's a huge factor. When we look at the departures, it's a combination of a little bit of graduation and a little bit of portal, more on the graduation side for this one, Kobe. DeLawrence Butler, he is one of the portal transfers, though, as well as Alan Jones, who very good football player. Alan Jones was for the Tigers. And as far as graduation is concerned, Bry Webb was their leading rusher. Chris Benian, I believe it is, leading receiver. Travion Stanford, a running back. Travion Lambert, an edge rusher, who I believe had double-digit sacks a year ago, which at the Division II level, double-digit sacks, we all know, very impressive. And Lamar Gray, a defensive back. So as you can see, Kobe, they're kind of losing certain players at each little position group, right? Guy in the D-line, guy in the O-line, guy in the running back, guy in receiver, DB. But they're also bringing in, not a lot, though. So they're bringing in 2 Mississippi College transfers, Caden Cup, the receiver, and Barrett Kane, the O-lineman.
Love that. So the Choctaws, of course, I don't know if you're familiar, Drew, but they actually had to shut down their football program. They're rebranding their entire institution, and football is on the way out at Mississippi College. So, again, to see those guys get new opportunities is really neat.
Yeah, so they're expecting them to come in and play, and, it's exactly what they would want as well, especially like when your university shuts down, it's like, what do I do? Oh, here's West Alabama, a very sustainable team that you can help win. What more could you ask for? So the questions that I had down, obviously I talked a little bit about, start 9-2 a season ago, a loss to Lenore Ryan in the playoffs. It was a tough loss. So how do you build on that? You just got a little taste of success. Let's keep going and let's keep building from that. Who steps up offensively? You lose a top rusher. You lose a top receiver. New playmakers are going to have to emerge to keep this offense rolling. You're expecting people to step up, not because you're not bringing in a ton from the portal. You're bringing in a receiver from Mississippi College, so you expect him to come in and play immediately. But who from the leading team that you had a year ago is going to step up and have a bigger role? But like we talked about, it's always nice when you lose guys to have a returning quarterback. And Spencer Arsenault, returning signal caller, very efficient.
Killed the pronunciation, by the way. Dude is a dog. And actually, not to cut you off again, but currently Spencer is at the Manning Passing Academy, which is a really, really sweet deal for him.
Well, I'm glad you said I killed it, because I was kind of using the whole Joe Burrow when he switched his last name to try to get that one right. I knew it had O at the end. So I believe I got that right. But yes, you're absolutely right. Spencer Arsenault seems like he's going to be a really good guy for them returning. We talk about it all the time, especially with quarterback. I think quarterback's the biggest. You know what I mean? Every position group is very much okay, another year under my belt, another year under my belt. But when a quarterback is like, okay, I like this check because I like this play right here. Oh, this concept's good in this type of play. Oh, I like this in the red zone. So it's like a quarterback understanding this offense really good, especially when you're losing a couple guys. Tyler Walker, expect him to potentially be the number one wide receiver going into 2025. He was, I believe, second on the team in rushing or receiving a year ago, so expect big things out of him. Ishmael Naylor returning. This is an older team, though, Kobe, I will say. Ishmael Naylor is going to be a fifth year. I believe Tyler Walker will be a fifth year. And then Spencer Arsenault should be a senior. And then you look at Cody Sigler, the defensive lineman. Expect him to step up as well, too, because he's not only was a junior a season ago, so he's like a younger guy, but at the same time, he still has a little bit of more football in him. So expect him big things. And then Isaac Williams as well in the defensive backfield. So not only did we talk about how they're losing guys in each spot, but there are guys that are ready to take that spot, not necessarily as quote unquote top dog, but to be the leaders in that room.
Yeah. 100%. To close it out, of course, the change of the reins at the helm of this program, bringing in Scott Cochran, the new head coach of the Tigers heading into 2025. And this is a guy who we've covered on the show a good bit. For those who don't know, Coach Cochran, longtime strength conditioning coach at Alabama under Coach Nick Saban, where he won multiple national championships, actually goes by Coach Yeah for the way that he was just constantly so vocal and on his guys, earned a lot of respect from those players. Actually has some former Alabama players and other personnel as a part of his staff here, Drew, which is a really neat deal. I have to give the full breakdown on that, but he's a guy who actually made the move after being with Coach Saban for a while, made the move over to be with Kirby Smart at Georgia and won quite a few games over there with the Bulldogs. Took a little bit of time away from the game of football to speak on substance abuse, which was something that he actually went through during his playing career. Very happy to have Coach Cochran back in the football world, this time at the Division II level. The Tigers spoiled to have him at the helm. Obviously haven't had as much contact with those guys. That's one team that I'm probably the most excited about heading into the fall, because I think there's a big question mark around them. I think we kind of know what to expect with some of the others. Of course, a lot of turnover at other spots. West Alabama is probably the most exciting team for me right now in the Gulf South.
Speaking of Coach Cochran, I mean, that's got to be really tough going from Nick Saban to Kirby Smart. Like, I can only imagine how, exhausting it was to go from one of the best to, or
See,
the
I wonder
best
if he
to
was
one
exhausted with them or they were exhausted with him, man. You watch some of that old tape. He was everywhere, and he let you know about it. I love it.
I think that's exactly what you need out of a strength coach, the guy who sets the tone immediately.
Dude,
and so you bring that energy, into a locker room, you bring that energy into the meeting room, guys are going to be pounding their head to run through the wall for him. That's exactly the type of energy that you want.
It's authentic, right? Like he has this track record in this background of being that guy. You don't come in and take the job and then start acting like an ass and doing all this yelling and shouting and hoorah, all this. You do that because that's who you are, and you've got decades of experience and things doing it that way, and that's the way you operate. Guys buy into that. Guys can sniff out phony very quick at every level. Guys can sniff out phony. Not the case with Coach Cochran, from everything I can tell.
Absolutely. Like, if you all of a sudden start a press conference with biting kneecaps, I'm pretty sure people can tell if you're being real or not.
Or, hey, and if you don't, and if you turn out to be a phony, you are never going to hear the end of it.
Absolutely.
Right?
I mean, look at the genius they hired before the kneecap guy. I mean,
terrible, bro. Terrible. But that's it for the Gulf South. A shorter kind of preview, so to speak, but not shorter in length. We did some good work there. I think we dove in and gave the people some good info, brother.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's fun because not only are we able to touch each conference, but we're also shedding light on guys that, this is what it's all about. You're not seeing these guys on SportsCenter unless it's on the top 10.
Yep.
Everybody gets a little shout out. It's great. And, we're doing great things here.